The sun was burning hot over the small town of Red Willow. Dust hung in the air and the smell of sweat and horses filled the street. People gathered near the old wooden stage where the monthly auction was about to start. It was supposed to be a sale of tools, wagons, and animals. But everyone knew sometimes there were sadder things for sale too, people who had lost everything. Among the crowd stood Eli Carter, a quiet cowboy with tired eyes and a weathered hat. He wasn't a rich man, but he worked hard and had an honest heart. His ranch stood a few miles outside town, lonely except for his horse and the wind that never seemed to stop blowing. Eli had come to the auction only because his friend told him he might find help for cheap, someone to cook or help on the ranch. He had no idea that day would change his life forever. The auctioneer, a man with a red face and a loud voice, stood on the stage waving a piece of paper. "Next up," he shouted. A woman, young enough to work, quiet as a stone. "Comes with her face covered for reasons unknown." The crowd began to laugh. Two men in dusty coats dragged a thin woman forward. She was wearing a torn dress and had a brown sack tied over her head with a piece of rope. Her hands were tied in front of her and she didn't speak a word. People whispered and laughed cruelly. Some said she must be ugly. Others said she was mad or dangerous. A few men tossed jokes back and forth saying she was worth less than a mule. The woman stood still, her head slightly bowed, not reacting to anything. The auctioneer raised his hammer. "Who'll start the bidding?" $2. He yelled. No one answered. The silence grew awkward. The crowd began to shift, waiting for someone to mock or shout. The woman didn't move. She just stood there in the heat, as if the world had already turned its back on her. Eli felt something inside him stir. Maybe it was pity, maybe something deeper. The way she stood, silent but proud, reminded him of someone he had once loved long ago. Her stillness brought back a painful memory. Anna, his fiancée, who had disappeared years ago during a flood. She had been the only woman he ever loved. He never found her body, but everyone told him she was gone. Since then, Eli had lived quietly, carrying her memory like a ghost beside him. The auctioneer shouted again, $2, gentlemen. $2 for the nameless woman. Come on, she can clean, cook, and maybe even talk if you ask nice. The crowd laughed louder. Someone threw a coin toward the stage, making the woman flinch. Eli clenched his jaw. He didn't know why, but he suddenly lifted his hand. $2, he said. His voice was calm, steady, but it carried across the crowd. Everyone turned to look at him. Some men laughed even harder. "Look at Carter," one said. "He's buying himself a ghost bride." The auctioneer grinned with relief. "Sold," he cried, slamming the hammer down. The deal was made. Eli walked forward, pulled out $2 silver and placed them in the man's hand. Then he gently untied the rope from the woman's wrists. She didn't resist, but when he reached for the sack, she shook her head quickly. He stopped. "All right," he said softly. "You can keep it on if you want." He led her down from the stage through the watching crowd. People whispered behind them as he helped her into his wagon. He didn't look back. As he took the reins and began to ride out of town, he could feel her sitting quietly beside him. The only sound was the creaking wheels and the wind brushing against the grass. After a few miles, he stopped near a stream to rest the horses. He handed her a water flask. "You must be thirsty," he said gently. She took it with shaking hands but didn't lift the sack. She drank a little and handed it back without a word. He tried to speak again. "My name's Eli Carter. You don't have to be scared." "I won't hurt you." Still, no reply. She turned her face slightly away, and Eli noticed that her hands were covered in small scars, as if she had been through fire or hard labor. He didn't ask questions. He just said quietly, "You can stay on my ranch. You'll have food, a bed, and peace. That's all I can offer." The sun was setting when they reached his ranch, a quiet stretch of land with a wooden cabin, a stable, and endless fields around. He helped her down from the wagon and showed her the barn where she could rest for the night. "You'll be safe here," he said. "I'll bring you supper." She nodded once but still didn't remove the sack. Eli went inside, warmed some soup, and brought it to her. She ate silently while he fixed the broken door hinge nearby. He tried again, softly. "You don't have to be afraid. Whatever happened before, it's over now." The woman's hand froze halfway to her mouth. Then she whispered so low he almost didn't hear it. "Thank you." Her voice was gentle, fragile, like someone who hadn't spoken for a long time. Eli smiled faintly. "You're welcome," he said. That night, Eli couldn't sleep. The sound of the wind outside reminded him of old days, when Anna used to sing softly by the window. He sat by the fire, staring at the flames, thinking of the strange woman with the sack over her head. Something about her movements, her quiet strength felt too familiar, but he shook the thought away. Anna was gone. This was just a woman in need. In the barn, the woman sat on the haybed, holding the edge of the sack tightly in her fingers. She could hear the soft sounds of the night, the horses shifting, the crickets singing, and Eli walking back and forth inside the cabin. For the first time in years, she felt a small piece of safety. She whispered to herself, "Eli," but too softly for anyone to hear. Outside, the moon rose high over the fields, lighting the quiet ranch in silver. The man who had lost his love and the woman who had lost her name had met by chance, or maybe by something greater. Neither knew it yet, but that $2 auction had tied their fates together forever. And somewhere deep in Eli's heart, something long asleep began to wake again. A faint feeling of hope he thought he'd buried with the past. The next morning, the air around the ranch was cool and quiet. The sun rose slowly behind the hills, spreading a soft orange light across the fields. Eli stepped outside with his coffee mug in hand and looked toward the barn. He could see faint movement inside. The woman was already awake. She was sweeping the floor with an old broom he had left there years ago. Her sack-covered head turned slightly when she noticed him watching, but she didn't speak. Eli smiled faintly and called out, "You're an early riser." She gave a small nod and went back to cleaning. He couldn't help but admire her effort. Most people in her position would have been too broken to care about work, but she seemed determined to be useful. After breakfast, he took some bread, eggs, and milk to the barn. She accepted them quietly, keeping her head low. "You don't have to hide in here all day," he said gently. "You can come to the house if you like." "It's warmer," she shook her head. Her voice came out muffled through the sack. "I'm fine here." Eli didn't push her. "All right," he said, "but if you ever need anything, you just call for me." Then he left her alone, wondering again what story lay behind that covered face. Days turned into weeks, and a quiet rhythm grew between them. She worked from sunrise to sunset, cleaning, feeding the chickens, fixing torn clothes, and cooking simple meals. Eli named her Missy, since she wouldn't share her real name. The name seemed to fit. It sounded gentle, mysterious, and a little sad. At first, Missy barely spoke. She answered with nods or one-word replies, but Eli noticed how carefully she listened whenever he talked about the ranch or the weather. Sometimes, when he came back from riding the horses, he found the tools cleaned and arranged or fresh bread waiting by the fire. Slowly, the house that had once felt empty began to feel alive again. The people in town didn't understand. When Eli rode into Red Willow for supplies, they teased him. "Hey Carter, how's your ghost wife doing?" One man shouted from the saloon porch. "Does she ever take that sack off?" Another asked, laughing. Eli ignored them. He wasn't a man who cared much for gossip, but deep down the words bothered him. He wished people could see what he saw, a quiet strength in that mysterious woman. One evening, a storm rolled across the prairie. The wind howled and the rain beat hard against the windows. Eli sat near the fireplace, staring into the flames when he heard a soft sound. Humming. It was faint but familiar. He froze. The tune drifted through the air like a memory. It was a lullaby he hadn't heard in years, the same one Anna used to hum while making dinner. Eli stood and walked slowly to the barn, his boots sinking into the wet mud. When he reached the door, he stopped. The humming stopped too. He pushed the door open gently and saw Missy sitting on the hay, her hands folded in her lap. She looked up as if caught doing something wrong. "I know that tune," he said softly. "Where did you learn it?" She hesitated. "Someone taught me long ago." Eli felt his chest tighten. "Someone named Anna?" The woman's body stiffened. She turned her head away. "I don't remember," she whispered. Her voice trembled. Eli didn't press her. "It's all right," he said quietly. "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to." Then he handed her a blanket. "It's cold tonight. Stay warm." When he left, Missy sat frozen, clutching the blanket to her chest. Her heart pounded. She hadn't expected him to recognize the song. That tune was the only thing she had left from the woman she once was, the woman she thought she had buried along with her past. The next morning, the storm had passed. The land smelled fresh and water sparkled in the puddles. Eli was fixing the fence when he noticed Missy standing nearby feeding the chickens. He waved. "You survived the storm just fine," he joked. She gave a small laugh, the first one he'd ever heard from her. It was soft, short, but it filled the air with warmth. Eli couldn't help smiling back. "That's better," he said. "You should laugh more often. It suits you." That evening, they shared supper at the kitchen table for the first time. She sat quietly, keeping the sack on, but she spoke a little more. "You live alone," she said. "Why?" Eli looked at the fire. "I had someone once," he said. "She was taken by the river flood years ago. I never found her again." Missy's hands trembled slightly. "That's sad," she whispered. He nodded. "It was. But life doesn't stop for sadness. You learn to keep going." Silence fell between them for a moment. Then Missy said softly, "You're a kind man." Eli shook his head. "Just doing what's right." After she finished eating, she stood up to leave. "Good night," she said. Her voice sounded gentler now, less afraid. "Good night, Missy," Eli replied, watching her disappear into the shadows outside. Days later, something unexpected happened. Eli's horse broke free while he was out near the hills. The animal galloped toward the open plains. Eli shouted, but before he could follow, Missy ran out of the barn and chased after it. Her long skirt got muddy and the wind almost blew her over, but she kept running. After a few minutes, she managed to grab the reins and calm the horse. Eli caught up, breathing hard. "That was dangerous," he said, half angry, half amazed. She smiled beneath the sack. "I grew up around horses," she said. "I know how they think." Eli looked at her hands, noticing something he hadn't seen before, a small scar shaped like a crescent moon on her wrist. He froze. Anna had the same scar from the time she fell from a fence when they were young. For a moment, everything around him went silent. He swallowed hard. "Missy, where did you get that scar?" She quickly pulled her sleeve down. "I don't remember," she said. Her voice was sharp now, almost scared. Eli didn't ask again, but the image of that scar stayed in his mind long after she had gone back to the barn. That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, staring into the dark fields, trying to make sense of it all. Could it really be Anna? No, he told himself. Anna was gone. The flood had taken her. But what if she had survived somehow? Meanwhile, in the barn, Missy sat alone, tears soaking through the cloth over her face. She whispered to herself, "I can't let him know. Not yet." Outside, the moonlight touched the ranch gently, making everything look calm and peaceful. But beneath that peace, both hearts were restless. Eli was haunted by memories he thought he had buried. Missy was torn between fear and hope, trapped in a life she didn't want to hide from anymore. Neither of them knew that the truth would soon come out, and when it did, it would change everything they thought they knew about love, loss, and second chances. The days at the ranch slowly turned warmer. Spring brought life back to the dry land, and the quiet ranch began to look beautiful again. Green grass stretched across the fields, wildflowers danced near the fences, and the sound of birds filled the mornings. Eli worked hard repairing the barn roof, tending to the cattle and fixing the old windmill that hadn't turned in years. And all that time, Missy moved like a shadow beside him. Silent, graceful, always doing something helpful. She cooked, mended, milked the cows, and even planted vegetables near the kitchen window. She never complained, not even when her hands blistered from work. Eli watched her sometimes when she didn't notice. There was something in the way she moved, something too familiar to ignore. The more time passed, the more Eli began to feel something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. The house didn't echo with loneliness anymore. There was laughter again, even if soft. She began to talk a little more each day. Sometimes they shared small stories. She told him about dreams she had of a river and a little boy holding flowers, though she didn't say who the boy was. He told her about his horse Bandit and the time he almost got lost in a snowstorm. They both smiled more often now. One afternoon, Eli was cleaning the tools when Missy came by with a basket of eggs. "You've been working too long," she said softly. "You should rest," Eli chuckled. "You sound like someone I used to know." "Someone close?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "The closest." His voice dropped low. "Her name was Anna. She was my fiancée. The river took her years ago." Missy's hand tightened around the basket. "And you never found her?" "No," Eli said, staring off toward the hills. "They said no one could have survived that flood. But I still dream about her sometimes. Maybe that's foolish." Missy's voice trembled. "No, it's not foolish." Some people live in your heart forever. Their eyes met for a brief second, and Eli felt something stirred deep inside. Something warm and confusing. He turned away before it showed. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, the horses started acting restless. A storm was brewing again. Eli hurried to tie down the feed and close the gates. "Stay in the house," he shouted as the wind began to howl. But Missy didn't listen. She ran toward the barn, trying to keep the animals calm. The thunder cracked loudly above them, shaking the ground. Rain poured down in sheets and lightning flashed bright as day. Eli saw her struggling near the stall where the frightened horse kicked wildly. "Missy!" he yelled, rushing in. A loud crack split the air. Lightning struck the side of the barn. Fire burst across the hay bales. Eli grabbed a blanket, soaked it in water, and ran toward the flames. Smoke filled the air, thick and choking. He could barely see her silhouette through it. "Come out," he shouted. "I can't. The door's blocked," she cried. Eli pushed against the heavy beam that had fallen, his muscles burning until it finally gave way. He pulled her out just as part of the roof came down behind them. They both fell into the mud outside, coughing and gasping for breath. The rain put out the fire quickly, but the damage was done. The barn roof had partly collapsed. Eli looked at her. Her dress was torn, and the edge of the sack had ripped halfway open, revealing a small part of her face. He froze. He saw a faint scar on her cheek and a glimpse of soft brown hair clinging to her wet skin, the same color as Anna's. She quickly pulled the sack back down, turning away. "Don't look at me," she said in a shaking voice. Eli didn't say a word. He wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and guided her to the house. She sat near the fire, trembling as the warmth returned. He made tea and handed it to her. "You're lucky we got out alive," he said quietly. "That was brave what you did back there." She didn't answer. Her hands shook as she held the cup. After a long silence, Eli said softly, "I've seen that scar before." Her head turned slightly. "No," she whispered. "You haven't." He didn't argue. "Maybe not. But something tells me you've been through a flood before." Her shoulders tensed and tears began to soak the sack again. "Please," she said, her voice breaking. "Don't ask about my past." Eli nodded slowly. "All right. I won't, but you don't need to be afraid of me. I'd never hurt you." He stood and walked to the door, giving her space. But as he stepped outside, he whispered to himself, "Anna, if you're out there, I hope you found peace." Inside, Missy sat frozen by the fire, her heart pounding. She lifted a shaking hand to the sack, touching the scar beneath it. She wanted to tell him the truth, but fear held her back. She wasn't sure he could love the woman she had become, scarred, broken, and ashamed of her past. The next few days were quiet. Eli repaired the barn alone, and Missy stayed mostly inside. Neither spoke of that night again. But something had changed between them. A closeness, a shared secret that neither could ignore. One morning, Eli found a small bunch of wild daisies on his table with a note written in careful handwriting. "Thank you for saving me." He smiled, his chest tightening again. Later that afternoon, while repairing the fence near the river, he saw her standing on the bank staring at the rushing water. She looked lost in thought. He approached slowly. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, her voice distant. "The sound of water used to scare me, but lately, it feels familiar, like it's calling me back." Eli looked at her closely. "You've been near a river before, haven't you?" She didn't answer. The wind lifted her skirt slightly, and Eli saw that her hands were trembling. "Whoever you were before," he said gently, "you don't have to hide from it here." For a moment, it looked like she might say something, but then she turned away. "Maybe one day," she said quietly. That night, as they sat by the fire again, she hummed the same lullaby once more. Eli closed his eyes, letting the memory wash over him. It was the song Anna had sung when he built this house years ago. He remembered every note, every pause. When he opened his eyes, she had stopped humming and was watching him. "You know that song," she said softly. "I do," he replied. "It was our song, mine and Anna's." Her hands tightened around the edge of the sack. "Do you still love her?" Eli smiled sadly. "Always will. You don't stop loving someone just because time passes. Some people stay part of you forever." She lowered her head. "That's a beautiful thing, to be loved like that." He didn't notice the tear that slipped down from under the sack, but he did notice how her shoulders relaxed, as if a heavy burden had lifted a little. When Eli went to bed that night, he felt a strange calmness. The woman he'd rescued from the auction had somehow brought life back into his world. He didn't understand who she really was, but something inside him whispered that he was getting closer to the truth, a truth that had waited for years to be spoken. And outside, under the moonlight, Missy whispered to the night wind, "Soon, he will know who I am." But she also feared that when that moment came, he might look at her differently, not with kindness, but with pity. So she prayed silently that love, not fear, would guide him when her secret was finally revealed. The next morning began quietly. The rain from the night before had left the air smelling fresh and sweet. A golden light spread across the fields, and everything seemed peaceful. Eli was mending a broken gate when Missy walked toward him, her steps slow and uncertain. She was still wearing the same worn dress and the old sack over her head, but her hands were shaking slightly. "I need to tell you something," she said softly. Eli looked up, brushing dirt off his hands. "Of course," he said kindly. "What is it?" Missy hesitated, looking down at the ground. "You've been kind to me more than anyone ever was. You never asked who I am or where I came from. You gave me a place to stay when no one else would." Eli smiled gently. "You didn't owe me anything. Everyone deserves a second chance." She nodded, but her voice grew weaker. "Even people with broken faces?" Eli frowned. "You're not broken," he said quietly. "Whatever happened before, it doesn't change who you are inside." She took a deep breath and clutched the sack in her hands. "There's more you should know," she said, "but I don't know how to say it." He waited patiently. The wind moved softly between them, carrying the smell of fresh hay and wildflowers. "Just say it however it comes," he said. "You don't have to be afraid." Missy's voice trembled. "The flood? You talked about it before. The one that took someone from you. It didn't just take her from you, it nearly took me too." Eli's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Her hands were shaking so badly now that the sack twisted in her fingers. "I was there that night," she whispered. "The water came so fast. I tried to reach the bridge, but I fell. People thought I died, but I was carried downriver. A farmer found me days later. My face was hurt, badly. I couldn't bear for anyone to see me like that." Eli felt his breath catch. "The farmer, he saved you?" She nodded. "He did, but I was scared to return. I didn't want anyone to remember me. I was ashamed. I lost my name, my home, everything. So I hid. The world seemed to stand still around them. The birds had gone quiet, and even the breeze had paused." Eli stepped closer, his voice soft. "You said you lost your name. What was it?" She took one shaky breath and whispered, "Anna." For a long moment, Eli didn't move. The word hit him harder than thunder. He stared at her, his mind refusing to believe what his heart already knew. "Say it again," he whispered. She lifted her head slowly. Her hands loosened the knot at the back of her neck. The sack slipped free and fell to the ground. Underneath, her face was pale and scarred, but her eyes, those gray-blue eyes, were the same ones he had loved years ago. "It's me, Eli," she said, tears filling her eyes. "It's Anna." Eli couldn't speak. He felt his chest tighten as memories rushed back, their laughter, their plans, the day she disappeared. He took a step forward, afraid she might vanish again if he blinked. "Anna," he said softly, almost in disbelief. She looked down, ashamed. "I didn't want you to see me like this," she whispered. "The fire, the flood, they took my face. I didn't think you could love me anymore." Eli's eyes burned with emotion. He reached out and gently lifted her chin so she would look at him. "You think I cared about scars?" he asked. "I thought you were gone forever. I prayed for you every night. And here you are." Anna began to cry. "I didn't mean to hide from you. I just didn't know how to live after what happened. I couldn't face the world. When I saw you at that auction, I wanted to run, but I was too weak. Then you bought me. Not because you wanted a servant, but because you wanted to save someone you didn't even know. And I knew then you were still the same man I loved." Eli felt tears sting his eyes. He stepped closer, his voice breaking. "You have no idea what it means to see you again. I thought God had taken you from me." She smiled faintly through her tears. "He didn't take me. He brought me back to you in his own way." They stood there in silence for a moment, the wind brushing gently through the tall grass. The sun touched her face, showing every scar, every mark of pain she had endured, but also the strength in her eyes. Eli reached out and brushed a strand of her brown hair from her cheek. I'd know those eyes anywhere, he said softly. No matter what's changed, you're still Anna. She leaned into his touch, crying quietly. Do you really mean that? He nodded. Every word. For the first time in years, the ranch felt alive again, not with sound or movement, but with a feeling of something pure, something stronger than time itself. Later that evening, Eli made a small fire near the porch. The sky was painted orange and purple as the sun went down. Anna sat beside him, wrapped in one of his coats. The light flickered across her face, and Eli saw both pain and peace there. I should have told you sooner, she said softly. I was afraid you'd send me away. Eli smiled faintly. Send you away? Anna, I spent years wishing for a miracle. You being here is the answer I never thought I'd get. She looked at him with tears in her eyes. You don't care what I look like now? He shook his head slowly. I care about who you are. The woman I loved was never about looks. She was strong, kind, and full of life. I see that woman right now. Anna wiped her tears with the back of her hand. For the first time, she felt free. Free from shame, free from hiding, free from the past. Eli stood and held out his hand. Come with me, he said. Where? She asked, a hint of a smile forming. Back to the place where it all began. He led her toward the small hill behind the house where they had once planned to build their wedding gazebo before the flood. The old wooden post still stood there half-broken, surrounded by wildflowers. The sky above them turned deep blue with streaks of pink. Eli turned to her. I lost you once, Anna. I won't lose you again. Anna's eyes filled with emotion. You mean? Yes, he said quietly. Will you marry me? She covered her mouth with her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent tears. After everything? Because of everything, he replied. You're the strongest woman I've ever known. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Then she stepped forward, her voice trembling. Yes, Eli, I'll marry you. The words hung in the air like a prayer answered at last. Eli pulled her gently into his arms, holding her as if the years between them had never happened. The wind blew softly through the tall grass, carrying the scent of the earth and the sound of the nearby river. It was the same river that had once torn them apart, but now it seemed to sing a different tune, one of forgiveness and love. As the stars began to appear above them, Eli whispered, You came back to me, Anna. That's all that matters. And for the first time in many years, Anna felt whole again. The man she thought she had lost forever still saw her for who she truly was. Not a woman hiding behind a sack, not a face marked by scars, but the same soul he had loved since the beginning. The night wrapped around them gently, and their hearts finally rested side by side. The morning after Eli and Anna spoke, the truth felt different from any other morning the ranch had seen in years. The sky was wide and soft blue, the air fresh after the night's rain, and the fields seemed to shimmer in the early sunlight. Eli stood by the porch with 2 steaming mugs of coffee, waiting. He heard slow footsteps behind him, and when he turned, Anna stood there, without the sack, without fear. Her brown hair was tied back neatly, and though the scars on her face told stories of pain, her eyes shone with peace. Eli handed her a mug and smiled. You look like yourself again. She smiled gently. It feels strange to be seen, but it feels right. They sat on the steps, sipping in silence. The wind carried the smell of wildflowers, and far off a hawk glided through the morning sky. Anna looked out toward the open land and said softly, I used to dream of this place. I just never thought I'd see it again. Eli nodded. You were always meant to come back here. Some things can't be lost forever. The next few days passed like a dream. The town of Red Willow soon heard the news. The $2 woman was not who they thought she was. Rumors spread fast, but Eli and Anna didn't care. For them, every moment was a gift they thought life had taken away. Anna began to work around the ranch without hiding. The neighbors who used to whisper when they saw her now stopped and waved politely. Some even came by with gifts, ashamed of how they had mocked her before. Eli always greeted them kindly, but he never let anyone speak ill of her. She's stronger than any of us, he would say, and everyone knew he meant it. Eli repaired the old barn completely and built a new window that looked out over the river. He told Anna it was so the place that had once caused her pain would now show her peace. She often stood there quietly, watching the flowing water. It doesn't scare me anymore, she said one day. It used to remind me of how everything was taken away. Now it reminds me of how I was found. Life slowly returned to the ranch, not the same as before, but gentler, wiser. They laughed together while feeding the chickens. argued playfully about how much sugar went in coffee, and worked side by side until sunset. One afternoon, Eli came back from town with a surprise. He carried a small wooden box. "I went to see the preacher," he said with a grin. Anna looked at him curiously. "Why?" He opened the box and showed her 2 simple silver rings. "Because you said yes." Tears filled her eyes. "You didn't have to spend money on this." Eli shook his head. "I spent more than $2 this time," he joked, making her laugh. "But this time it's not to buy a stranger. It's to marry the woman I've loved all my life." That Sunday, under the open sky, with only a few close friends and neighbors watching, Eli and Anna stood together near the old hill behind the house. Wild daisies covered the ground, and the preacher's voice carried softly in the wind. "Do you, Eli Carter, take this woman?" "I do," Eli said, his voice steady and full of warmth. "And do you, Anna Rivers, take this man?" Anna's eyes filled with tears. "I do," she whispered. When the preacher said, "You may now seal your vows," Eli took her hands gently. He didn't care about the scars or what others saw. He only saw the woman who had once laughed under that same sun years ago, who had faced death and pain, and still found her way back to him. He leaned close and kissed her forehead softly. The small crowd clapped, some wiping their eyes. That night, after everyone had left, Eli and Anna sat by the fire inside the house. The soft crackle of the flames filled the room. "Do you remember," Anna said with a smile, "how people laughed when you paid $2 for me?" Eli chuckled. "Best $2 I ever spent." Anna laughed quietly. "I used to think my life ended that day. I didn't know it was only beginning again." He nodded slowly. "Sometimes we lose everything just so we can learn what really matters." Outside, the wind brushed gently through the fields, carrying the faint sound of a coyote in the distance. Anna leaned her head on Eli's shoulder. "I never thought I'd belong anywhere again," she said softly. "But you gave me a home." Eli placed his hand over hers. "You gave me my heart back. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be alive." As months passed, the ranch began to change. Flowers bloomed where weeds once grew. The fences stood strong, and even the old windmill turned again, creaking like it was laughing with the wind. Anna filled the kitchen with warmth, fresh bread, laughter, and soft songs. Eli worked harder than ever, but this time he didn't feel tired. Every evening when he came home, she was there waiting on the porch. One afternoon, a group of children from town came running to the gate with baskets of wildflowers. "Miss Anna," they shouted, "our mama says you make the best biscuits in the whole county." Anna laughed, waving from the garden. "Tell your mama she's too kind." Eli watched from the fence, smiling. The woman who once hid her face now stood proudly under the sun, her laughter echoing across the fields. The past had not disappeared, but it no longer controlled her. Sometimes at night they sat under the stars, talking about the old days. "Do you ever think about that river?" Eli asked once. Anna nodded slowly. "Sometimes, but I don't hate it anymore. Maybe it was meant to carry me back to you, just by a longer road." Eli looked at her face in the moonlight, the faint scars glowing silver. "You've always been stronger than you knew," he said softly. "And you," she replied, "always had more love than I thought possible." Years later, when people told the story of Eli and Anna Carter, they called it the $2 miracle. Travelers who passed through Red Willow often stopped by the ranch to see the couple everyone talked about, the cowboy who bought a woman no one wanted, and the woman who turned out to be the love he had lost. Whenever someone asked about it, Eli would just smile and say, "Sometimes the world laughs at you because they can't see what's true yet." Anna would add with a soft laugh, "And sometimes love costs only $2, but it's worth a lifetime." They grew old together in that quiet ranch house, never rich in money but full of peace. Their story became a reminder in town that kindness can change a life, that patience can heal, and that real love doesn't fade with scars or years. On summer evenings, the children of Red Willow could often hear music drifting from the Carter Ranch, Anna humming her old lullaby, the same song she used to sing when Eli first built the house. And each time he heard it, Eli would look toward her with the same gentle smile, thankful for every moment that fate had returned to him. And so the cowboy and the woman once sold for $2 lived out their days together side by side, not as a tale of pity or luck, but as proof that even the deepest wounds can lead to beautiful endings when love is brave enough to wait.